What about cancer? 500,000 Americans are expected to die this year from cancer, equal to 5 jumbo jets crashing every day. The number of Americans who die from cancer each year is more than all the deaths in all the wars in U.S. history combined, and this happens every single year. A tumor cannot grow, though, without a blood supply. Currently, it's believed that a tumor can't get bigger than the ball at the tip of a pen without a blood supply, which indicates that angiogenesis, angio means vessel, so the genesis, the creation of new blood vessels is critical to tumor growth. Each one of us has cancer cells in us right now. But they can't grow without getting hooked up to a blood supply. So tumors diabolically release angiogenic factors, chemicals that cause new blood vessels to sprout into the tumor. The most important one is called VEGF, vascular endothelial growth factor. But we can suppress VEGF with veggies. Many of the phytonutrients we know and love in tea and spices and fruit and berries and broccoli and beans can block cancer's stimulation of new blood vessels. Given the power of plants, one might speculate that the foundation of an anti-angiogenic approach to cancer might be a whole food, vegan diet. How else can we starve cancer? 40 years ago, a landmark paper was published showing that many human cancers have what's called absolute methionine dependency, meaning normal cells thrive without the amino acid methionine, but cancer cells need it or they die. What does cancer do with methionine? Well, tumors use methionine to generate gaseous sulfur-containing compounds that specially trained diagnostic dogs can actually pick up. There are mole-sniffing dogs that can pick out skin cancer. There are breath-sniffing dogs that can pick out people with lung cancer. Pee-sniffing dogs that can diagnose bladder cancer. And yes, you guessed it, fart-sniffing dogs for colorectal cancer. Doctors can now bring their lab to the lab. Right? A whole new meaning to the term PET scan. Don't encourage me. Chemo companies are fighting to be the first to come out with these methionine depleting drugs, but since methionine is sourced mainly from food, a better strategy may be to lower methionine levels by lowering methionine intake, right? Eliminating high methionine foods for both cancer growth control and lifespan extension. So, where is methionine found? Particularly chicken and fish. Milk, red meat, and eggs have less. But if you really want to stick with lower methionine foods, stick with plants. Fruits, nuts, veggies, grains, and beans. In other words, in humans, methionine restriction may be achieved through a predominantly vegan diet, making methionine restriction feasible as a life extension strategy. So do people who eat beans live longer? Legumes, beans, split peas, chickpeas, and lentils, may be the single most important dietary predictor of survival in older people around the globe. Whereas a bean-free diet may actually increase the risk of death. It is now 8 years since the famous Ornish study was published, suggesting that 12 months on a strictly plant-based diet could reverse the progression of prostate cancer. Wait a second, how are they able to get a group of older men to go vegan for a year? They home-delivered prepared meals to their door, figuring, men are just so lazy, they'll just eat whatever's put in front of them, right? But what about out kind of in the real world, right? Well, realizing that you can't even get men diagnosed with cancer to eat a measly 5 servings of fruits and vegetables a day, researchers tried settling on just trying to change their A to V ratio, the ratio of animal to vegetable proteins. And indeed, were successful in cutting the ratio in half, at least, from about 2 to 1 animal to plant to kind of like half vegan, 1 to 1. How did they do? Well, a part-time plant-based diet appeared to slow down the progression of their cancer. But what Ornish got, though, was an apparent reversal in cancer growth, right? The cancer biomarker PSA didn't just, rise slower thanks to a healthy diet, but actually trended down, which could be an indication of tumor shrinkage. So the ideal animal to plant ratio may be closer to 0. If there's just no way Grandpa's going vegan, and we just have half measures, what might be the worst A and the best V? Well, eggs and poultry may be the worst, respectively doubling and potentially quadrupling the risk of cancer progression. Harvard researchers found twice the risk eating less than a single egg a day, quadruple the risk eating less than a single serving of chicken or turkey. And if you could only, add one thing to your diet, cruciferous vegetable. Less than a single serving a day of broccoli or Brussels sprouts or cabbage, cauliflower, kale, right? Cut the risk of cancer progression in half. 1 serving. Similar result was found for breast cancer survivors. Less than a single serving a day cut the risk in half of the cancer coming back. This Women's Healthy Eating and Living study was undertaken in 3,000 breast cancer survivors to determine if a plant-based, low-fat, high-fiber diet could influence breast cancer recurrence rates and survival. Imagine you've been diagnosed with breast cancer. In fact, an estrogen receptor negative tumor, which normally means twice the death rate, unless you eat 5 servings of fruits and vegetables a day and walk 30 minutes 6 days a week. The high vegetable, fruit, and physical activity really should be in quotes. You could eat 5 servings of fruits and veggies in a single meal, and certainly walk more than 2 miles a day. But imagine, for a second, you have just been diagnosed. Imagine sitting in that chair in the doctor's office as your doctor breaks the news. Imagine how you'd feel at that moment. Let it sink in. But there's a new experimental treatment that can cut your risk of dying in the next few years from over 16% down to just 4%. To quadruple their survival rate, many women would remortgage their home to fly to some quack clinic in Mexico, would lose all their hair to chemo, but most apparently couldn't stand the thought of eating broccoli and cutting down on meat. Maybe someone should start cooking meals for the women too. The only reason Ornish and colleagues were able to get away with treating cancer with a vegan diet alone, no chemosurgery, radiation, is because prostate's a slow-growing cancer. And patients with early disease can be kind of placed in a holding pattern. So if you're not going to do anything but watch and wait, you might as well test out a dietary intervention. Are there other cancers like that we can test out plants on? Esophageal cancer is not the cancer to get. Most die within months of diagnosis. But the development of esophageal cancer is this multi-stage process. You start out with a normal esophagus, the tube that runs from your mouth down to your stomach. Starts out fine. Then precancerous changes start to take place. Then localized cancer starts to grow, and eventually it spreads, and you die. But because of this well-defined, kind of stepwise progression of the cancer, researchers jumped on it as a way to test the ability of berries, the healthiest fruits, to reverse this process. A randomized, phase 2 clinical trial of powdered strawberries. 6 months of eating the equivalent of a pound of fresh strawberries a day, and the progression of disease was reversed in 80% of the patients. At the beginning of the study, none had a normal esophagus, but by the end of the study, most lesions either regressed from moderate to mild or disappeared completely. Right? From moderate to mild, or from mild to gone. By the end of the study, half of those on the high-dose strawberry treatment walked away disease-free. 52.7% cured. A drop in tumor markers before and after. All because of just strawberries. Right? Cellular proliferation before and after strawberry treatment. Same story with black raspberries and oral cancer. Right? Most patients' lesions improved, including complete clinical regression. Now you see it, now you don't. A turning back on of tumor suppressor genes. So even though it may have been something like tobacco that caused the cancer, right, diet can still affect progression. But this kind of treasure remains buried, no pun intended, because nobody profits. Nobody, that is, except the hundreds of thousands of people that die every year from these horrific cancers.